Pastor Lucius Okello. Tonight I'm going to talk about Deborah and Barak versus Sisera. The story is found in Judges chapter 5 and verse 20. Straight away I read, "From the heavens the stars fought. They took from their courses, they fought against Sisera." This was Deborah's song after having victory over Sisera. She sang together with Barak. They sang a song that covers the whole of chapter 5 of the book of Judges. Very beautiful prophetic song that they sang to worship God and to celebrate the victory that God had given them. Well, before we dive into this story, it is all about examples of spiritual warfare in the Bible. That's what we're talking about. I'm doing a series on examples of spiritual warfare in the Bible, and they are under a bigger theme, building the Lord's army. But before we dive into this story, let us look at the background. Let's look at a few people around here. Israel, the Bible says, had turned away from God and were worshiping idols, and so God handed them over to Jabin, king of Canaan. Jabin, king of Canaan, for 20 years. Now, Jabin, king of Canaan, had a commander for his army called Sisera. So Sisera was the commander of Jabin's army, and Sisera had 900 chariots. In the meantime, Israel did not even have a spear. They did not have any weapons. Since they were under oppression, they were not even allowed to possess weapons, so they were in a weak state. Deborah, the wife of Lapidoth, was the judge. Now, if you have read the book of Judges in the Bible, you know that in those days, after the death of Joshua, Israel had no leader. So God raised up judges. Judges were prophetic voices, people who could stand in the gap and they could pray for the nation and they could judge cases. They were really the leaders, and they were doing almost everything in terms of leadership at that time, giving direction, giving judgment, and giving prophetic voice and prayer for the nation. So the book of Judges is mainly about that. So Deborah is just one of the many judges that we read about in the book of Judges in Israel at that time. So that is the background. So we are going to talk about how Deborah and Barak defeated Sisera, the commander. This man, Sisera, was very strong. He was very powerful. He was just quite a powerful commander with 900 chariots. He fought and defeated many kings. And Jabin, the king of Canaan, really trusted him so much, and he had so much confidence in what he was doing and the powers maybe that he was using, that he knew that Israel was definitely subdued. He did not know anything. He did not think or realize that God was about to do something so special in the life of Deborah. So what happens? God speaks to Deborah to call for Barak and tell Barak, get ready, mobilize the Israelites, mobilize the soldiers, get ready to attack Sisera. And you can imagine, of course, Barak in that state of oppression was a coward, was fearing. How do I dare to do that? But at least he believed that Deborah was a prophet of God and believed the word of God, and told Deborah, I can't go alone, you must come with me. And Deborah said, definitely I am coming with you, but because of your kind of behavior, the victory will be given to a woman, not to you, the man. The honor of that victory will be given to another person. Well, since we are talking about spiritual warfare in the Bible as we are building the Lord's army, we need to go deeper. Now, the Bible here says, from the heavens the stars fought against Sisera. Stars in heaven fought against Sisera. Now, there are many interpretations to this. Somebody can interpret this to mean the angels from heaven fought against Sisera. And I believe this is very correct because angels were in action. because of the intercessions of Deborah, because of the prophetic prayers of Deborah, angels came into action and they fought. Actually, the Bible tells us that when Barak attacked, God, through confusion, God fought against Sisera and defeated him. The defeat was so quick and so sudden and so powerful that nobody in Sisera's army survived, and Sisera jumped off his chariot and ran on foot. And we know the story that he went as far as a certain place and met a woman called Jael, and he was too tired, entered in her tent and requested for water. Jael gave her a jug of milk, a bowl of milk to drink, and he fell asleep and covered him. But Jael took a tent peg and hammered and pierced him in the temple, and he died. By the time Barak came running following after Sisera, he found he was already dead in Jael's tent. So God gave actually the honor of victory to Jael, because Barak at first was not strong enough, and God said, I'll give the victory to a woman. Well, nevertheless, that is not what we are aiming at. What we're aiming at is the spiritual warfare that Deborah, the prophetess and intercessor for Israel, did. We need to know that prophets in Israel were not just there to prophesy. They were there first and foremost to intercede, to stand in the gap, to pray for the nation. The prophet Samuel said, far be it from me if I do not intercede for Israel. That was the main work. And up to today, the major work of a prophet is actually intercession for the people, intercession for the nations. Well, in the process of intercession, you will receive prophetic messages to give instruction to the people what God is saying about them as God begins to answer your prayers. Now, Deborah, being at that level of judge, was definitely at a high level of spiritual warfare. I want to understand something like that. Now, Deborah did spiritual warfare at the level of the heavens, the stars. Stars. If you remember, we talked about Pharaoh and Moses. God was people go weapon. God told Moses, take your stick, throw it down. And so from the stick of Moses, it turned into a snake. And when he faced Pharaoh, he threw the stick down, and the stick turned into a snake, and the snake swallowed the. But Pharaoh said, what is that? I also have my people. So he told him, come over. So he called his astrologers, he called his magicians, he called his sorcerers, and they also threw down their snakes, and they turned into snakes. Nil. But something else happened. Moses and Aaron's snake swallowed up all the snakes of the magicians of Pharaoh. And that's how the victory began to be. That's how the spiritual warfare, but that is what we did last week. That's the session we did the other time, Moses and Aaron versus Pharaoh. The snakes of Moses and Aaron swallowed the snakes of Pharaoh. So God already knew that Pharaoh had sticks that turned into snakes. And so he told Moses to throw the stick down, and it turned into a snake to swallow Pharaoh's sticks. In this case, this time Deborah and Barak versus Sisera, this time God again knew that Sisera was depending upon certain powers. Now we know from the scriptures that many kings and powerful commanders of those days depended upon certain powers. They worshipped idols, for example, and they depended upon priests. They depended upon certain sorcerers. For example, Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, he had very many astrologers, wise men, enchanters, sorcerers, a big group of people. Those were those are agents. Those are people who are able to do satanic things. They were able to do rituals. They were able to listen to spirits. They were able to do enchantments. Those kind of people, I would call them priests of Satan. He had a whole bunch of witch doctors around him. We also know that in the days of Jezebel, she also had 450 priests of Baal with him eating at the high table. We also know that Pharaoh, we've already talked about it, he had lots of astrologers and magicians right near him. So these leaders of old depended on these magicians, wise men, astrologers, to enchant for them, to do rituals for them, to do sacrifices for them, to contact the gods for them, and to keep them in power. And so we have every reason to believe that Jabin, king of Canaan, was also depending on certain powers. And Sisera, the commander, because he was really being fronted much, looks like Jabin was not the fighter like other kings, but Sisera was a great fighter, a great commander. So he must have had his kind of, when somebody is so confident in himself and he looks like he can conquer everybody, then you know that he is not just himself, he has something he's depending upon. So you can be sure that Sisera had certain powers he was depending upon. He was definitely a worshiper of the stars. He was an astrologer. He had astrological powers. He was a sorcerer of a high rank. And he was a worshiper of the stars, and he derived his victories, his powers from the stars. And because of that, he fought many battles and he won many battles. Now, God, being who he is, knew all the secrets of Sisera, that this man fights from the heavens, this man enchants from the stars, this man worships the stars. He's an astrologer, he's a sorcerer of a high rank. Now, such a sorcerer who enchants from the stars, even if you try to fight him until you discover where his enchantments are coming from, you will not defeat him in any battle. But here, God used the prophet Deborah to see into the spirit and to realize that yes, Sisera is using the powers of the stars, is using astrological powers, he's using sorcery of a high level of the heavens. And so Deborah also had to go into spiritual warfare, into the heavens, and begin to prophesy, and begin to declare, and begin to engage the forces of the heavens, the heavenly powers that are in the stars. She prophetically prayed and defeated those astrological powers of Sisera. And after the battle was done in the spirit world, she now called Barak to go and attack. And exactly, brethren, this is how it works. You don't attack in the physical before you defeat the enemy in the spiritual. You don't go out preaching the gospel openly in a crusade before you have finished the battle on your knees. That's not how it works. The victory must be won in the spirit before it is manifested in the physical. Let me give you an example from the Karimojong. The Karamojong warriors, well, I lived in Karamoja for 8 years, and I learned a lot from the Karamojong warriors. Karamojong warriors used to do a lot of raiding of animals in Teso, in Bulambuli, in Kapchorwa, and all over. They were a nuisance to many people in those years. No more today, because God has helped us to enter Karamoja with spiritual warfare and to do the necessary in that place. So the Karamojong warriors, before they could go to raid cows, they first go to their big shrine, a raiding shrine, and they make massive sacrifices of bulls, and they call the elders who are actually priests to read the intestines, and they declare that yes, and they begin to prophesy that this is what is going to happen. We are going to come back with cows, and they keep showing that we are coming back with cows. They really do it prophetically. And when the soldiers begin to move, they go out, and every river they cross, they make a sacrifice and a declaration. Like when they came to Lower Mount Elgon here, in Ngenge, they had to cross Greek River. They sacrificed a bull first before they attacked. Then they went on top of one of the hills in Ngenge and did another sacrifice and consulted the gods of Sebei to allow them to raid the cows. It was only after those spiritual consultations with the gods, with the spirits, that the spirits allowed them to raid the cows. And when that happens and they took the cows, even if you chased them, you would not catch up with them because they had made a spiritual transaction. So this is what we are talking about. Before you get out to do things in the physical, like Barak going to fight Sisera, there must be a spiritual transaction that must take place and get finished and be agreed upon before you can show up. Now, I picked another story from the Pokot many years ago because I also lived in Karamoja. I mean in Kapchora. I stayed in Kapchora for another 13 years. And the very time I went to pastor a church in Kapchora, that was the time when they come. That was around 2003. That was the time when the Pokots came and raided Bukwa. That is the last district towards Swam border. They raided cows and was devastating. They threw children in the burnt houses, threw children in the burning flames, and took cows. And they even took cows from the homes of pastors. That annoyed me because I was an overseer of pastors, so I had to go find out what's happening in Bukwa. Then I had to go all the way to Kacheliba, that is in Pokot, and ask a few questions. I went to Deliverance Church Kacheliba and talked to the Pokot people, born again ones, and asked them, tell me what makes a Pokot, and how does a Pokot do what he does? How does he become what he is? How do they go to raid? This is what they told me. That before the Pokots, actually I went as far as Kacheliba, before the Pokots could come to raid in Bukwa, first of all they go to Mount Motelo and they meet one of their prophets. And they tell the prophet, we want to go and get the wealth from Sebei. And so they give the prophet a calabash of beer. After the prophet has drunk a calabash of beer, he falls asleep for 30 minutes. When he wakes up, he says, well, I have already been to Sebei and have negotiated with my friends there, and they have allowed me to take the wealth. So this is how you'll go. When you reach River Swam, you must sacrifice a young girl, a virgin, and pour the blood in the river, and then you cross. That is the ritual you need to do to cross into Sebei. Now that's what they did in 2003, and after the crossing, they now went and the prophet also tells them, this, you'll get so many animals, but this particular type is going to be mine, and you reserve that for me. The rest are yours. And so that's how exactly what the Pokot raiders did. They consulted their prophet. They had 3 great prophets at that time. Then they crossed River Swam after pouring the blood of a young girl. I think the girl was around P5 girl. And then they came to to Bukwa, and they did that havoc. And they took away the cows, and even the UPDF could not chase them and get them. What am I talking about? A spiritual transaction has to take place before the physical assault takes place. This is what we are saying, building the Lord's army, spiritual warfare in the Bible. A spiritual transaction. The Pokots they first go to their priests, they go to their prophets, and they do a spiritual transaction. They do sacrifices. Everything is finished before they arrive. And so in the same way, Sisera always consulted the stars. Sisera always consulted the astrology. He consulted the spirits, the principalities, the powers that reside in the stars, because he had a covenant. He had an altar in the stars. Of course, the altar on earth links up to the altar in the stars. And so he fought in the heavenlies. And using that sacred weapon, he defeated very many armies. But God revealed to Deborah, that this man's powers come from the stars. And Deborah had to do spiritual warfare in the heavenlies. And after defeating him in the spirit world, in the heavenlies, she now commanded Barak to go and fight, to go into action. And when they went to fight, the Bible says the angels of the Lord, the word angels are not mentioned, but they are mentioned in Deborah's song. The angel of the Lord, they came and They defeated Sisera completely, and Sisera could not believe he's defeated. Even his mother back home did not believe her son was defeated. Even Jabin, king of Canaan, could not believe what had happened, but it was done. That is how Deborah defeated Sisera. The battle first took place in the spirit world, in the heavenlies, in intercession, in prayer and fasting, in spiritual warfare, before Barak could go on front lines of attack. Brethren, we should learn these spiritual lessons. You don't just go preaching without, first of all, defeating the forces of darkness in the spirit world. You don't just go preaching. You don't just go doing things before first doing some spiritual mapping to understand what powers are being used here. You've got to go on the ground and do spiritual warfare. Spiritual mapping. You've got to ask God, how is this battle going to be? What am I going to do? What am I dealing with in this stage? Am I dealing with the witchcraft on earth here? Am I dealing with satanic altars? Am I dealing with satanic prophets and priests? Am I dealing with the stars? What am I dealing with? In the case of Deborah and Barak, they were dealing with Sisera, who was an astrologer, a sorcerer of high ranking, who was consulting his powers. His witchcraft was connected to the stars. And so it was only after God prophesied Deborah and she did the necessary intercession and spiritual warfare that they were able to overcome Deborah.